American Vampire Volume 1, written by Scott Snyder and Stephen King, art by Rafael Albuquerque. American Vampire. So this is a really cool vampire book. Probably one of my favorite vampire tales, one of the best horror books of the last decade. Co-written by Stephen King, master of horror, very cool. And Scott Snyder, arguably one of the biggest names in comics, especially in the early 2010s when this book series started coming out. Scott Snyder, he was writing the Batman book at the time, so everybody knew him basically. If you read comics, he had a really good Batman run, Death of the Family, Court of Owls, and storylines like that. But I really liked his horror stuff. And this book especially was really fun. You have these two sets of vampires. You got the old school European vampires, and you got the new school American vampires, and they each have their own power sets, and they have a struggle for power, so that is really fun. Each volume of the book kind of covers a new decade, so it's really fun because you see these vampires throughout time. In volume 1, we're going to be covering the 1800s, the Old West, and then we're going to have some time in the 1920s in Old Hollywood. So some really fun exploration of all these different eras. Now, I'm planning on only covering volume 1. I may return to this series later and go through everything, but for now I'm just doing volume 1 because it is October and I wanted to cover a month of various horror books, and this is one I wanted to showcase to you all because it is really quite fun. Now, volume 1 has a good beginning, middle, and end, so we do get a lot of closure at the end of volume 1, so it does make for a good one-shot video. I'm pretty sure you all enjoy it. Now, last week, Scott Snyder put out American Vampire 1976, the start of a brand new miniseries, and that is the miniseries that he is going to use to wrap up his American Vampire chronology. So that is pretty exciting. So let's dive into American Vampire Volume 1, and you can all see this very fun vampire story go on. Issue 1, Big Break / Bad Blood. So first we go on to Big Break. The first part of issue 1 is set in the 1920s and is written by Scott Snyder. The year is 1925. We are introduced to two women, Pearl Jones with black hair and her roommate Hattie Hargrove with orange hair. Both of them have dreams of starring in movies in Hollywood, but are right now just working as movie extras. They are both on set right now on a movie being produced by Hollywood bigwig B.D. Block. Together, Pearl and Hattie are staring at A-list actor Chase Hamilton, who is the star of the movie they are in. Now their scene is shooting now, and Pearl and Hattie, they have to pretend to be scared. The director calls action, and they scream. Later on, after their day of work, they return home to their boarding house they are staying at. They see a man sitting out by the pool. This man, we will soon learn throughout these opening issues, is actually the American vampire known as Skinner Sweet, and one of the main protagonists in this series. But for now, the ladies don't know much about him. Later that night, Pearl has to go to her second job because her acting gigs are not paying enough to pay all the bills at the moment. Pearl, she works at some sort of nightclub as a hostess of sorts, carrying cigars to various customers. And then in the morning, Pearl finishes her shift at the nightclub, and now she has to go to her third job. She works as a waitress in a restaurant called the Happy Egg. Before she can head over there to her third job, a man named Henry Preston walks over to her. He is a musician that also works at the same nightclub as Pearl. Henry asks Pearl out on a date, but she says that she can't. She's got to go to her other job right now. But Henry, he at least decides to walk with her. They discuss Henry traveling the railways for a short period of time as a hobo, and Pearl shares that she has a black sunflower tattoo on her body. The two of them talk some more, and they make plans to go on a date to the beach on the 4th of July. Later on, when Pearl is back on the movie set, she is needed to read some lines with actor Chase Hamilton, the A-list actor. Pearl, she's only needed so they can get a light reading for the main actress that will be coming on set soon. Chase Hamilton, though, he's pretty suave. He extends his hand for Pearl, and the two of them talk for a bit while the crew is doing all their lighting preparation work. Chase, he's impressed by Pearl and tells her that the producer of the movie, B.D. Block, is throwing a party tonight, and Chase invites her to the party. Pearl, she's excited about being invited to an A-list Hollywood party being thrown by the producer of the movie. This could actually be pretty good for her career if the producer takes a liking to her. She accepts ecstatically. Back over at Pearl's place she is renting, she and her roommate Hattie are getting ready and are dressed all fancy to go to this Hollywood party later tonight. Now Skinner Sweet, he is sitting by the pool and he's making some conversation with Pearl, who's waiting for Hattie, and they have some light teasing banter back and forth. And Pearl tells Skinner that, this apartment complex is just supposed to be for women only. And Skinner tells her, oh, you love it that I'm here. Admit it, you old birds love having a cock in your henhouse. And Pearl says, listen, I don't know which poor girl you've shacked up with, but... And Skinner says, hey, I ain't shacked up with anyone, Dolly. I just like your pool. My dance card is open. And Pearl replies, oh, I'm swooning. Why don't you take off that hat and let me see what I've won? I'm guessing you've got a certain dashing elephant man look about you. And Skinner removes his hat a bit and says, oh, it's worse. Much, much worse. But I'm pretty on the inside. Skinner finds out they are going to this party being thrown by this B.D. Block, and he tells Pearl, B.D. Block's parties? They ain't no fun at all. No, if I were you, I'd pass on his little jamboree tonight. And Pearl says to Skinner, oh, like B.D. Block. And Skinner says, well, we're more like old acquaintances, really. Actually, I'm just in town to finish a bit of business with the old coot. And believe me, honey, his get-togethers are a bunch of cheese-sniffing Europeans drinking with their pinkies out. Why don't you just stay here and I'll show you a real party? Pearl says, thanks, but I happen to like drinking with my pinky out. Finally, Hattie is ready, and Pearl and Hattie head off to the big Hollywood party. When they arrive at the party, the girls are impressed with all the glitz and glamour of it all, and all the Hollywood celebrities around. Hattie is recognizing tons of people. There's Harold Lloyd by the bar, and over there is Louis Brooks, and there is Lon Chaney. I've died and gone to heaven. Eventually, they see Chase Hamilton there with a blonde woman on his arm. Later on in the evening, Chase steals away Pearl and brings her into a back room to introduce her to B.D. Block. Chase makes the introduction, and then he leaves. Now Pearl, she is nervous. She is standing in front of this big Hollywood producer, B.D. Block, and she says, pleasure to meet you all. I just wanted to say, it's such an honor to meet you, Mr. Block. I've been a fan of your film since I was a little girl. And B.D. replies, funny. I stopped paying much attention to them myself. Have you heard this noise about the so-called talkies? Filmed with synchronized sound? Soon, very soon, you will be able to hear for the first time the voices of America's biggest movie stars. Hear them talking and singing and begging for your attention. I will make these films for you, Miss Pearl, but you see, the bitter irony of the situation is that I myself don't want to hear anything you have to say. It is then revealed that Bernard D. Block is not only a movie producer, but also a vampire, and he has 4 other vampire associates with him, and they all jump on Pearl and begin to attack and devour her. Alright, now we're going to jump to the second story that we're going to be following in this first volume of American Vampire. This one is called Bad Blood, and we are jumping to 1880, and this part of the story is written by Stephen King. So we're in 1880, and there is a narrator for this part of the story, and the narrator's name is Will Bunting, and Will is the author of Bad Blood, a novel chronicling the life and times of notorious Wild West outlaw turned vampire Skinner Sweet. Will spends most of his time following various characters, documenting their stories for use in his novels. Now, leaving by train, we see a man named James Book. He is a mustachioed detective in the Pinkerton agency, and he just arrested that Wild West outlaw Skinner Sweet, and they are taking a train ride to have Skinner hanged somewhere. The townspeople are celebrating James and his fellow detectives, and he is getting a hero's send-off. On the train being transported, we see Skinner Sweet is there. Skinner Sweet, at this point in time, is just your run-of-the-mill, sociopathic Wild West outlaw, a notorious thief and murderer who earned his nickname for his sadism as well as his love of candy, hence the name Sweet. James Book, he's trying to get some information out of Skinner Sweet on the whereabouts of the rest of Skinner's gang. The rest of Skinner's gang composes of Ronnie Jeeks and the Blackmouth twins. Skinner is not giving his people up though. They talk some more. We see Skinner Sweet's gang partners, Ronnie Jeeks and the Blackmouth twins, are watching the train approach from the distance. They are going to attempt to rescue Skinner. Back inside the train, we see various other people are celebrating the arrest of Skinner Sweet. On the left is Felix Camilo, a deputy of Mexican descent who works with James Book. There's Agent Finch. He is James Book's boss in the Pinkerton agency, and he has given his team a pat on the back for a job well done. Beside him is Will Bunting, the author, once again. The author, he is gathering material for his novel. He is following Skinner Sweet and these Pinkerton detectives. And lastly, there is Mr. Percy. Mr. Percy is a very rich man, and he controls much of the Old West with his money. Now, the humans on the train are unaware that Mr. Percy is actually the head of the aristocratic, old-school European vampire clan. Skinner Sweet and his associates had apparently robbed a bank of Mr. Percy's, so Mr. Percy retained the Pinkerton agency's services to capture Skinner Sweet, and that is what has brought all these various characters together here on this train right now. They all ride on the train some more, and we see Skinner has some candy in the ribbon of his hat. James and Skinner are talking. Eventually, James gets fed up talking to Skinner, and he has his deputy Felix sit with Skinner to watch him. Skinner begins chewing on his candy, and he is intimidating Felix. Now the train is approaching a broken part of the rails, and it will soon veer off course and crash. Skinner, he uses his candy to pick his handcuff lock. Skinner wraps his handcuff chains around Felix's neck and begins to choke him. The train runs off the rails and crashes. Ronnie Jeeks and the Blackmouth twins watching from a distance as the train eventually comes to a stop after falling on its side. They then charge the train. Now that the train has settled, Skinner Sweet tries to climb out a smashed up window. Detective James Book attempts to stop Skinner, and the two of them begin fighting and struggling. Skinner tells James, "You know, I could kill you with this knife. It's as sharp as a razor blade, but then who would throw dirt on your sweet wife's little coffin?" And James is confused. His wife is safe and sound, but Skinner says, "Well, I figured how lonely she must be with you out chasing me and all, so I sent her a bottle of wine." Only the wine that Skinner sent her was poisoned wine, and he sent along a letter saying, "Ella, my sweet, drink deep and you will taste my kisses, Jim." So Skinner wrote this letter pretending to be this Ella's husband, James Book, as a way to trick her. James is obviously upset over this. Him and Skinner fight some more, and Skinner appears to have momentarily won the battle, and Skinner, he joins his fellow gang members and they hand Skinner a gun. Skinner, he wants to shoot and kill this Agent Finch, but James Book sits back up and tells Skinner, "I'll kill you, you bastard." Skinner hides behind Agent Finch, using him as cover, and Skinner shoots James Book away. All of a sudden, Skinner and his gang are staring down Mr. Percy, the vampire, who approaches them. All four of them shoot down Mr. Percy, seemingly killing him, or so they thought. Mr. Percy, actually being a vampire, he stands back up, and he lunges at Skinner Sweet, extends his fangs, and takes a big bite out of Sweet's neck. Skinner Sweet falls down, but he shoots Mr. Percy in his head, and by doing this, some blood flows from Mr. Percy, and the blood droplets fall directly into Skinner's eye. Skinner, he tries to wipe the blood out of his eyes. Mr. Percy claws at Skinner's neck, seemingly killing him. Now we see James Book, the detective. He's still alive, the gunshot wound just grazed him. Mr. Percy, the aristocratic vampire, he is upset, and he says to himself that Skinner has ruined everything. He was supposed to be an example of what happens to people who steal from my bank and my railroad. Agent Finch, he walks over to Skinner Sweet and kicks him in the head. He says, "I only wish you could feel this, you murdering asshole." Not exactly what Agent Finch had planned, but what's done is done. Rest in peace, Skinner Sweet. So they all believe that Skinner Sweet is dead. The only problem is, some of Mr. Percy's vampire blood made its way into Skinner's eye, thus making Skinner go from the brink of death, and it will eventually turn him into a vampire himself. Will Bunting, the author, says that he started writing his book that night, and he knew he could only publish it as fiction because no one would believe it. Issue 2, Morningstar / Deep Water. So first, Morningstar. Back in 1925, Hattie Hargrove, Pearl's roommate, notices that Pearl is not in her room. We see Pearl is still alive after the vampires attacked her. She is just south of the mansion, wandering the desert, and she is bleeding a lot. We see her black sunflower tattoo she talked about with Henry last issue. Pearl, she is barely hanging on, and she will die soon. Henry Preston and Hattie Hargrove, they speed in a car, and they arrive to find Pearl near death. They get Pearl to the hospital, and the doctor doesn't think that Pearl has much of a hope for life, saying that the damage to her body was too extensive, and that Pearl's body is shutting down, her organs are failing. Hattie and Henry are crying, saddened by this. We see it is now the 4th of July. Fireworks are going off. Skinner Sweet climbs up to Pearl's hospital window, and he says to her, "Sigh, ain't that a shame? Old Block's party actually bored you to death, I see. Still, I can't in good consciousness let you miss out on our country's 149th birthday. It'd be downright unpatriotic of me." Skinner, he bites his lip, draws some blood, and he kisses Pearl's eye, thereby turning her into a vampire as well. Pearl wakes up later in the morgue. They must have thought she died, but then she came back to life once the vampire blood worked its magic on her. She is among all these dead bodies, only she is alive once again, and she is certainly freaked out a little bit by all the grotesque corpses around her. Pearl makes her way back to her home, and there Skinner Sweet is waiting for her. Skinner breaks the news to Pearl that she died, and he turned her into a vampire to save her life. Pearl is confused because she knows a little bit about vampires from what the media writes in their books and movies, and she says she was walking out in the sun. But Skinner explains that she and him are a new sort of vampire, an evolutionary jump for vampires. That movie producer, B.D. Bloke, He and his crew, they were the old school European vampires. But see, sometimes when vampire blood hits someone new from somewhere new, it makes something new with a whole new bag of tricks. Pearl and him, Skinner Sweet, are a breed of vampire called the American vampire. And the one big difference is that the sun has no effect on them. Skinner, he's gonna leave. He says his business with Block fell through, but Pearl should give Block his regards. Pearl tells Skinner to wait. She doesn't understand anything, and Skinner tells her, just listen to your instincts. That's what I do. Also, I left you a note on the icebox, kind of an us versus them scorecard. Pearl asks Skinner, but why did you choose me? And Skinner says, I don't know. Maybe I was just sick of Beady Bloke and his kind having their way with pretty young country girls. Or maybe because I can't keep out of trouble. Skinner leaves. Pearl sees the note that Skinner left her, and we see this note, it explains that them, meaning the European vampire, they like blood, moonlight, faggy clothes, and they dislike sunlight, that's a biggie, dislike wood, pine especially, and they dislike you. Whereas us, the American vampire, he writes, oh, I don't want to ruin the surprise. Off we go, Skinner Sweet. P.S. Left you a little something in the closet. Pearl checks the closet in her home and sees that Skinner has left Pearl Chase Hamilton as a present. Chase was the A-list Hollywood actor who enticed Pearl to meet him and then fed her to the vampires. See, Chase Hamilton had an arrangement. He served Beady Bloke and the European vampires, bringing them helpless victims in exchange for fame and parts in the movies. Chase Hamilton doesn't even seem to recognize Pearl. Chase tells Pearl, a man, you see, a fiend. He grabbed me from behind as I left my dressing room, and before I knew it... Anyway, can I use your telephone? Thank you. He grabs Pearl's telephone and phones the operator, and he wants to know the address here. He's gonna phone his vampire friends and tell them his whereabouts and what happened to him. Pearl, though, she decides that she wants some revenge on this Chase Hamilton, and she turns into her more bestial vampire form with big fangs with long razor-clawed fingers that she can swipe with, and she attacks Chase Hamilton, slashing at him. Chase Hamilton is running away, blood dripping from him. He is yelling, help, please. What did you do to me, you bitch? So numb, can't move. Pearl grabs Chase Hamilton and drags him somewhere where she can torture him for a bit and extract some more information on these European vampires. Later on, Chase Hamilton is eventually found dead in his dressing room on set. Pearl left him there to be discovered. Issue 2, Part 2, Deep Water. Continuing with the B story, author Will Bunting, narrating from 1925, is talking to a room full of people that have come to hear him speak about his novel, and he continues to recount the events he witnessed in the 1880s. Back in the 1880s now, in the town of Sidewinder, after the train wreck and fight, Skinner Sweet, believed dead, was buried in a coffin. Detective James Book, he fell into a coma because of his gunshot wound for about 4 days, and on the 5th day he awakened to the news that Skinner Sweet had murdered his fiancée with poisoned wine, just like Skinner Sweet gloated that he did. We see an image of James's wife Ella, dead, lying on the carpet in their home with the poisoned wine sprawled out all over the floor. James Book is obviously horribly upset at the news of the passing of his wife. He eventually makes a trip over to Skinner Sweet's grave and he pisses on it. James Book, his deputy Felix Camilo, and author Will Bunting all leave town together. They are gonna go pay respects to James Book's wife. Skinner Sweet, though, down in his coffin, is now awake. The vampire part of him has brought him back to life, but he is still trapped down there with no way of getting out. He does manage to have some candy with him though, so he chews on that a little. We jump over to Mr. Percy and his European vampire associates. They discuss having to apply sun cream to not burn in the sun, and one of the vampires discusses how some blood from Percy touched Skinner Sweet as he lay dying, and he's afraid it might turn Skinner into a vampire himself. Percy yells, "What? That's ridiculous. You think I would allow that to happen? Americans are only food for us, like the great slabs of cow they shovel down their throats." The other vampires continue, "All the same, your blood splashed him and you were seen." Percy brushes it off, saying, "Seen by a few outlaws and a writer from the Sensation Press?" Mr. Percy doesn't think that any of this should concern them. He says, "Skinner Sweet is dead and there's money to be made. Not in this shit-littered trail stop either. It's in the railroad and the land south of here, in the New Mexico territory. The land we picked up for pennies an acre. It'll be worth a fortune once it's irrigated." Mr. Percy and his European vampire associates begin to build a dam in the nearby river. This dam, once it's built, will put the town of Sidewinder underwater, as well as Sweet's grave along with it. With Skinner Sweet buried underwater in his coffin, there's no way that he would ever bother them again. Now Skinner Sweet, still in his grave, managed to survive on the odd rat here and there. And Skinner comments while eating a rat, "Not bad, but I wish I had some sweet stuff," referring to his love of candy. Over the next 5 years, life went on. Eventually, the town of Sidewinder that Skinner was buried in was flooded underwater by the nearby dam. We see the townsfolk were forced to abandon the town. We see a rowboat rowing through the old flooded town, and Skinner Sweet's coffin filled with a little bit of water. Jumping along a few years, it is 1885. James Book, his deputy Felix Camillo, and the author Will Bunting were still together. James and Felix arresting people, hunting bad guys all over. Will Bunting following them, getting further materials for future books. It is 1886. Felix gets married. James Book is his best man. It is 1888. Will Bunting shows James the outline for his book, Bad Blood, about Skinner Sweet and what happened to him. James resents that the bad guy, Skinner Sweet, seems to get all the attention in the book. Will says that bad sells. It is 1890. Felix Camillo's daughter, Abelina Camillo, was born. James Book was the godfather to the child. Felix Camillo's wife passed away, though, in childbirth. She wasn't able to be there for the child's baptism. It is 1909 now. It has almost been 30 years since Skinner Sweet was buried in that coffin. We are now in the town of Lakeview, Colorado, the town that replaced the flooded Sidewinder. Scavengers from Lakeview in scuba gear are searching the water. They are looking for Skinner Sweet's coffin. Since Skinner is a somewhat famous outlaw figure, if they can find anything in Skinner's pockets or his hat, it might be worth something for the memorabilia that they could sell. The scuba diver, he goes down to Sweet's coffin and he opens it, only to find Skinner Sweet still there alive. Skinner wasn't a vampire like Percy and the Europeans were. He was his own kind of vampire. Water wouldn't hold him and sunlight wouldn't burn him. But Skinner, he was starving in the dark, too weak to escape. But now that his coffin was open, it is Skinner's chance. He attacks the scuba diver, saying, "Hello, motherfucker. Got any candy?" The Wild West outlaw, now vampire, Skinner Sweet is now free once again after almost 30 years. Skinner Sweet, after feasting on the scuba diver's blood, has regained some strength, and he has swam out of the water. Skinner Sweet, he wants to get his revenge on Mr. Percy, as well as on James Book. But first things first, he's gonna go get himself some candy. Issue 3 Rough Cut / Blood Vengeance. Firstly, in Rough Cut, we are in July 1925. Pearl returns to her boarding house where her and Hattie live. Hattie is happy to see Pearl alive. Pearl tells Hattie it's not safe here and you should go. Pearl gives Hattie some money. Hattie asks Pearl if someone is after her, and Pearl replies, no, I'm after them. Pearl leaves and tells Hattie she'll call her when it's safe to return home. We jump over to BD Block and the European vampires. They have had word of the news that Chase Hamilton's corpse has been found. Chase Hamilton, the servant of BD Block. The vampires discuss how they feel Skinner Sweet is taunting them. See, the European vampires made an agreement, a treaty of sorts with Skinner Sweet where they wouldn't attack each other. One vampire there argues, treaty or not, Skinner Sweet is an offense to our race. Some of the vampires really want to kill Skinner Sweet. BD Block argues that Sweet's weaknesses are still unknown to them. Lucia, a female vampire there with blonde hair, says, yes, but we do know that he rests during the moonless time, and the moonless time starts tonight, in a matter of hours in fact. All we have to do is find his hiding spot. BD Block rejects this attacking Skinner Sweet idea for now. He says if we attack him, it would push Sweet too far. He may do something drastic, like ally himself with the vassals, whoever they are. For now, Block sends 2 vampires, Edgar and Lucia, to go to this Pearl's house and clean up the mess. See, before Chase Hamilton died at Pearl's house, he phoned those vampires from Pearl's place so that they would know the location. So Edgar and Lucia head on their way, and Block and the rest of the European vampires go into a back room to have something to eat. We see some humans being tied up back there. Lucia and Edgar get into the back of a car as another Hollywood actor named Tad Chesterfield, another human loyal to BD Block, prepares to drive them over to Pearl's place. On the road, though, Pearl is anticipating them, and she is on a motorcycle, and she has come for her revenge. She drives up beside this Tad Chesterfield, and she tells him, I always hated your movies. She then transforms into her more bestial vampire form, and she jumps from her motorcycle on top of the roof of the car that this Tad Chesterfield is driving. She tears a hole into the roof of the car. She then extends her hand down into the car, and she clean rips off this Edgar's face in the back seat. The car crashes. Edgar crawls out of the car without his face, and he is a vampire that is weak to the sun's rays, so he extends an umbrella over himself. Pearl jumps on him though with a wooden stake and puts it through him and kills him. Lucia, the other vampire, she crawls out from under the car, the sun burning her a bit. Lucia comments on Pearl, looks like Sweet made himself a mongrel bitch. What a pleasure to meet you. You are an abomination. Do you know that? You degenerate trash. Pearl urges Lucia to climb out of the car so they can fight as she licks the blood off of her long razor claws. She then slashes at Lucia. Lucia falls back a bit. Lucia threatens, your kind will never prevail. Pearl replies, hey, I'm doing okay so far. Pearl drags Lucia over to some sort of cactus plant and she says, you know, most people don't realize the thorns are actually made up almost entirely of wood, which the European vampires are weak to. She shoves Lucia onto the cacti's pricks, killing Lucia. Pearl then goes on to find Henry Preston, her love interest. Henry is happy to see Pearl is in fact alive. Pearl tells her story to Henry, all about being a vampire now and whatnot, and what that all entails for her. Henry, he doesn't believe it, and he is skeptical. Pearl begins to feel weak, though, as the moonless night descends, and as her and Skinner are American vampires, they are weakened in the moonlight. Pearl asks Henry if she can stay a few nights, and he agrees. Pearl dozes off. The next night, Pearl receives a phone call from BD Block. Block has captured Hattie and is persuading Pearl to meet him at the big sign up on the hill an hour from now if she ever wants to see Hattie again. Pearl, she jumps into action. She runs to Henry's car to take it, to go and save Hattie. Henry wants to go with Pearl, but Pearl ditches him and takes off alone. She says, "I'm sorry, Henry, but this is between me and them." Alright, we jump over to the second story, Blood Vengeance. It is 1925. Author Will Bunting is still giving his talk on his novel Bad Blood, and he is telling the listeners in attendance that the events of his book, Bad Blood, were true and not fiction, as he had everyone believe. The people in the audience are skeptical. They think that this is all just a cash grab for Will's book, which is being reprinted, by the way. Will tells the people in the audience to believe whatever they want. He's here to tell the truth once and for all, because there is more to the story of Skinner Sweet than anyone knows. Will continues telling the story. We jump back to the year 1909. This is where we left off with Skinner Sweet last issue. He has just awoken from his coffin after being trapped there for almost 30 years. He wants revenge and candy. Skinner Sweet returns to town, and he is trying to make sense of how long he has been down under for. 10 years? 20 years? He doesn't know. He goes to the town of Lakeview, which used to be the town of Sidewinder. He sees a drugstore promoting a newfangled technological marvel known as the telephone. He sees an advertisement for a brand new one-reeler movie, a BD Block production, so some tying into the 1925 timeline. But Skinner Sweet found what he was looking for, candy. He sees a candy store and goes over to it. He kicks down the door. He starts eating tons of candy. The store owner, or maybe just a good Samaritan, he runs in and draws his gun on Skinner Sweet. Skinner jumps the man, bites into him, and drinks his blood. Skinner comments, "Everything tastes better when you're dead. Who knew?" Skinner leaves the candy shop and goes to search for the mayor's office. A mailman sees Skinner and says, "Mister, you're covered with blood." And Skinner replies, "Cut myself shaving." Now, if you don't want to suffer a worse fate, tell me where the mayor's office is. As Skinner makes his way to the mayor's office, two police officers spot Skinner and give him a little bit of trouble, so Skinner Sweet makes quick work of them, slicing and killing them both. Now Skinner Sweet, he no longer needed a gang to cause trouble. He tore the town of Lakeview apart all on his own. Skinner comments to himself, "Payback starts here, and payback's a bitch." Skinner single-handedly killed many of the townspeople. Skinner walks over to a place where some explosives that are going to be used in the mine are being stored. Now we see Mr. Percy and the European vampires are watching from a building's window, watching Skinner cause all this havoc in town, and they can't believe it. They can't believe that Skinner has risen and that he is walking in full sunlight. They have no chance of fighting him in the sun. Well, apparently, Ronnie Jeeks and the Blackmouth twins, Skinner Sweet's old gang members, they all work for Mr. Percy now. So Percy orders his men to go fetch them and have them deal with Skinner. Now the townspeople, they're trying to get organized, so they round up the chief of police, Mr. Finch. Now Finch, he is the cop who was James Book's boss back in issue 1. So he and Skinner Sweet have a little bit of history. The police, they round up a posse, and together they all go after to confront Skinner Sweet. As they approach Skinner, Skinner blows up the building behind him with those explosives he collected. Agent Finch, chief of police now, is terrified, and Skinner tells him, "Why? If it ain't Book's old boss, Finch, and I do mean old, Where is he, boss man? And Finch, terrified, says, if I tell you, will you let me go? Skinner replies, you bet, partner. Come here. Let's talk. Do I look dangerous to you? Finch tells Skinner that James Book is in New Mexico, same town where his old deputy lives with his daughter. Skinner Sweet replies, James Book and the Beaner. How nice. Hold this for me, Finchy. And he places some dynamite down Finch's shirt. And Finch says, hey, you promised you would let me go. And Skinner says, nope, I said you bet. And you did, and you lost. Finch explodes and it dies. Now the mayor of the town, he was rounded up with his posse. His name is Hector Camilo, and he is actually the father of Felix Camilo, James Book's deputy. The mayor, he is pointing a shotgun at Skinner Sweet, and he says, I'm making a citizen's arrest. And Skinner says to him, easy there, Senor Mayor. Let's talk this over. I can see you've got a good head on your shoulders. Next page, we see Skinner Sweet has removed the head of that mayor, and then he decides to send a telegram to Felix Camilo, the son of the now dead mayor, as well as to Deputy James Book. The telegram Skinner Sweet sends reads, Dear Felix Camilo, I have something you want. Ride for the old Bakersville mines. Bring Book. Your pappy says hello. Your old sweet amigo, Skinner Sweet. Now we see Will Bunting, James Book, Felix Camilo, and Camilo's daughter, Abelina Camilo, who is now an adult. They receive the telegram and can't seem to get any answer from the town of Lakeview. Now they thought Skinner Sweet was long dead, so this telegram is particularly alarming. So they begin the journey from where they are back to the town of Lakeview to see what is going on. Now back in Lakeview, the European vampires under their umbrellas hiding from the sun discuss how they have sent this Ronnie Jeeks and the Blackmouth twins, Skinner's old gang members, out to deal with Skinner. And if they fail, they received word that James Book and Felix Camilo are coming back to town, so maybe they will deal with Skinner. And if that fails, worst case scenario, these vampires will make a deal with Skinner. Now Ronnie Jeeks and the Blackmouth twins, they follow Skinner Sweet to the old mine shaft in which the gang had previously hidden their money at. Of course, Skinner's been buried for almost 30 years. The gang has moved that money since then. Skinner has placed the head of Felix Camilo's dad, the mayor, outside on a tree for all to see. And inside, he is waiting in the mine shaft for everyone to arrive. Issue 4, Double Exposure / One Drop of Blood. First, Double Exposure. It is 1925. Pearl arrives at the Hollywood sign, the meeting place that Beady Bloke told her to meet him at. Pearl is yelling for Hattie. Pearl is weak because it is a moonless night. The European vampires spot Pearl. Block gives up Hattie and tells Pearl he plans to take Pearl back to his home and stab her with every goddamn thing under the sun until he finds out what can harm her. Hattie runs into Pearl's arms, but then Bloke tells Hattie, Miss Hargrove, you wanted an audition, right? The European vampires have promised Hattie fame and career success in Hollywood if she turned on Pearl, and Hattie agreed. Hattie turns on Pearl and stabs her in the back, literally in the back, with a knife. Pearl, saddened, asks Hattie why, and Hattie explains, because I'm not like you. I don't have what you have. I'm not good at the tough parts, but I'm good at making new friends. I'm really sorry. The European vampires begin attacking Pearl. One swipes at her, launching Pearl back at the wall. Another vampire moves towards Pearl, holding some chain shackles. Pearl grabs her heels, though, and shoves one heel into this other vampire's eye. Pearl begins running away, and she tumbles off a tiny cliff onto the street below. Henry, he finally managed to catch up with her in his car, and he quickly carries Pearl and places her in his car, and he frantically drives off. One of the vampires jumps on the roof of the car. Pearl grabs Henry's small gun though, and shoots the vampire in the head, knocking him off the car. Henry and Pearl manage to escape. Now Pearl is weakened, and Henry tells Pearl to drink from him. At first she refuses, but Henry insists. So Pearl does so, and she replenishes her strength. Pearl and Henry then share a kiss. In the sunlight, Pearl is saddened, reflecting on how Hattie had double-crossed her. Hattie was her best friend. Pearl's situation begins to overwhelm her, but Henry Preston says that she has to confront those European vampires and can't keep running away. Henry reveals that he is a Marine, and he tells Pearl that he's with her on this fight against the old world European vampires, and he is planning to help her. We jump over to the second story, One Drop of Blood. Back in the year 1909, James Book, Will Bunting, Felix Camilo, and his daughter Abelina Camilo spent 2 days traveling and have finally arrived at the city of Lakeview to confront Skinner Sweet. Now, Will Bunting has done some research and tells the group he suspects that Mr. Percy is indeed a vampire, and Percy must have infected Sweet when some of his blood got into Sweet's eye as he was dying, and made Sweet a vampire himself. Will can't figure out, though, vampires, they typically can only walk by night. If Sweet is a vampire, how was he able to take Lakeview on in full sunlight? James Book says, I only want to know one thing, Will. How to kill him once and for all. Now, Ronnie Jeeks and the Blackmouth twins are still positioned outside the mine. They have been watching Skinner Sweet inside the mine for about 2 days now, waiting to see what he's gonna do. Now, Skinner Sweet, inside the mine, is sitting on a throne of sorts of dead corpses. Now, he notices, though, his fangs are almost completely gone, and his skin is soft, vulnerable, and he wonders, why is he so damn sleepy? He sees there is no moon outside, and realizes that that must have something to do with it. He must be weaker when there's no moon. He comments to himself, it's sure not easy learning a new existence. Ronnie Jeeks and the Blackmouth twins, they get ambushed by Book, Camilo, and Bunting, and they get knocked out. Felix grabs some binoculars to check out the mine, and he sees his father's severed head hanging on a tree outside. Felix grows enraged, and he charges down towards the mine to kill Skinner himself. His daughter tells Felix to stop. It's what Skinner wants for you to just charge in there. But he goes on anyway. The European vampires arrive to watch the show through their telescopes. They do comment that they are a little hungry though, so they might try and pick up a quick meal somewhere. Inside the mine, Felix goes running in. He trips on a rock and he tumbles. Skinner quickly grabs him, and he burns Felix's face with a torch, killing him. James Book heads to the mine to follow after Felix. Before James can go in the mine, though, Abelina stops James, and she tells him, there's something you need to take with you, and she kisses him on the mouth. Now, James feels this is maybe a little bit wrong. This girl is his goddaughter. James tells her to stay here. Abelina tells James to send the monster to hell. As James enters the mine, he sees his deputy, Felix, dead on the floor. James goes further into the mine, and Skinner attacks him, causing James to drop his gun. But James manages to break Skinner's arm. Skinner is weakened, remember, from the lack of the moon outside. James grabs his gun and goes to fire at Skinner, but Skinner picks up a rock and blocks the shot with it. Skinner then throws the rock at James, knocking him over. Skinner says, I was gonna kill you, but I've got a better idea. He is going to try and turn James into a vampire as well. and he drips blood into James's eye. Abelina enters the mine as well, and she fires at Skinner, telling him to leave James alone. Skinner, he runs along deeper into the mine shaft, but we see some of his blood has indeed made its way inside James's eye. Abelina fires her gun at some support beams, which starts causing the mine to begin to collapse. Her and James make their way outside of the mine shaft. Outside, once safe, they mourn Felix and check out James's eye. The old world European vampires who were watching from afar, while they were watching, they fed on Ronnie Jeeks and the Blackmouth twins, feasting on them, and they left, assuming that Skinner Sweet was now dead, or at least he was now buried under all that rubble of the collapsed mine shaft, and he will no longer be a problem to them. Now, Skinner Sweet's fate is unknown to most of these people, but he has been underestimated before in the past. This is perhaps just another example of that. Abelina, Will Bunting, and James Book rode on, but we see that James Book seems to have been turned into another American vampire. A single drop of blood was all it took. Issue 5, Curtain Call / If Thy Right Hand Offend Thee. This is the final issue in this first volume. Curtain Call. Pearl and Henry arm themselves with any wood weapons that they can find. They are gathering wood from signs and fence posts, etc., and are carving them into wooden stakes. Now we see Beady Bloke with his European vampire associates in their lair. Pearl and Henry, they bust through the door of that lair and are there to confront these vampires. Henry kills one of the vampire associates with a wooden stake. Pearl gets into a fight with another vampire, brandishing a sword, but she manages to kill that vampire with another wooden weapon. And Beady Bloke is the only other vampire that remains here. He grabs Pearl's boyfriend, Henry, and Pearl tells him, "Let him go, we can settle this fight, you and me." And Beady Bloke replies, "Oh, but we can't, my dear. This fight is much bigger than you can imagine. It's a war, you see, a war you and your kind will never win. You might be stronger than we are, Miss Jones, but we are many, and we have been here in your country since before it was a country, and we are everywhere. We are the true line, and you are nothing but an abomination." And Pearl says, "Now Bernie, you know what they say about people in glass houses." And she throws her wooden weapon through the skylight, breaking the glass, letting the sun shine down into the room, and it burns Beady Bloke to death. With Beady Bloke now dead, Pearl just has one loose end to deal with: Hattie. Pearl confronts Hattie on a movie set. It is revealed that Hattie has now been turned into a vampire as well. In a flashback, we learn that Hattie intentionally turned herself into a vampire by cutting herself with the knife that she cut Pearl with in the last issue. Hattie tells Pearl, "Believe it or not, this is all for the best, Pearl. You're not built for this, any of it. You're tough, sure, but when it comes right down to it, you're a good person. And in the end, you just don't have the stomach for this town, honey." They battle, swiping at each other, biting each other. Pearl has the upper hand. She tells Hattie, "You were supposed to be my friend." She grabs the gold star on the dressing room door, and Pearl tells Hattie, "You want your star so bad, Hattie? Eat it." And she shoves it into Hattie's mouth, killing her with that gold star. In the aftermath of all this battling, later on a boardwalk, Pearl and Henry discuss their future plans, what city they're going to move to, what their life is going to hold for them. Henry, he has to step away for a moment to get something. Now while Pearl is alone and Henry is briefly gone, Skinner Sweet approaches Pearl. Pearl thinks that Skinner is going to kill her. Skinner admits the thought did cross his mind, but he changed his mind. He asks Pearl if there's any chance he could win her away from old Henry. The two of them could have all sorts of fun together. Pearl says, tempting, but no. Well, Skinner says, well, goodbye, but he sure won't be the last time the two of them see each other. He says, plans, plans, so many plans, and then he leaves. Henry returns back to Pearl, and the two of them begin the next stage of their lives together. Now we jump to the second story, If Thy Right Hand Offend Thee. We jump to Will Bunting in 1925, telling the continuing story of Skinner Sweet. Now one man in the audience is angry, thinking that Will is lying. Will tells the man to sit down and shut up. The audience claps. They are captivated by Will's story now and want to know how it ends. Skinner Sweet is secretly in attendance in the audience as well, watching, eating a candy cane. We jump back to 1912. It has been 3 years since James Book last battled with Skinner Sweet, and James Book has turned into a vampire now, and he hates it. He is trying to fight his animalistic urges, but he is forced to feed on small animals and groundhogs and whatnot to get his nutrition. James, he hires quack doctors to try and cure him, all to no use. He scares the quack doctors away. Now James, he is still traveling with Abelina Camilo, his goddaughter, the daughter of his now dead partner, Felix. Abelina loves James. She is trying to encourage him to push onward. James feels like there is no good way this can end for him. She kisses James, and he calls her crazy, says that she is young enough to be his daughter, and that is what he thinks of her as well as his daughter. And Abelina replies, "Part of you thinks of me as something else. I love you, Jim, not as a daughter, but the way a man loves a woman." And James yells at Abelina to get out. Abelina leaves crying. Back over to that collapsed mine shaft where Skinner Sweet is now buried under. Two men are digging in it. They are digging and searching for Skinner Sweet, and they manage to find him. Skinner is now able to crawl out of the ground. The diggers explain that Mr. Percy, the banker, he hired them to dig up Skinner and bring Skinner to his ranch. Skinner, he kills some of the men, steals their horse, and he decides that he wants to go see Mr. Percy himself. He figures it's time to meet his maker, and he wants to see what Percy wants of him. So Skinner, he travels and arrives at Mr. Percy's ranch, and he sees that Percy has a pretty palatial estate with a ginormous building that looks like a castle on it. Skinner comments to himself, "Man, maybe I should have spent my life working in a bank instead of robbing them, but what fun would that have been?" Skinner is brought before Mr. Percy, and he asks him what his reasons are for not letting him rot down there in those mines. Mr. Percy explains that he wants to offer Skinner a deal. He says, "Admittedly, my friends and I, we haven't been the fairest to you when you first emerged as one of us, but different. We were wary. By definition, though, we are family, and in difficult times like these, despite our differences, we stand together as family. Needless to say, a vampire with your abilities, together we could accomplish so much. Join us, Mr. Sweet. We're prepared to give you territory all your own, riches beyond your wildest dreams, and beyond this, we're offering you a chance to belong. Every outlaw needs a gang, after all. So what's your answer, Mr. Sweet?" Skinner, he doesn't want any part of this. He drags Mr. Percy out to the front of his estate. Percy is begging Skinner to stop. He says he'll give him anything he wants. He can give Skinner $1 million. And Skinner replies, "It's worth $1 million just to watch you rot." Skinner throws Percy out of the shade and into the sun's light, where Percy burns alive and dies. Skinner walks away, muttering all about his various plans he has. Back over to James Book. He is with Abelina, and he begs her to kill him. And Abelina says that she'll do it on one condition. She kisses James. She wants James to give her a child. James says, Abby, I can't. I stood godfather at your christening, and now you're asking me to... And Abelina says, I've lost everyone I love, and now I'm supposed to lose you as well? I'll see you turn into a bloodsucker before I let that happen. I need something to hold on to, a little piece of you. It's my fertile time, Jim, please. And James says, God help me. And together the two of them make love. Back in the current day, 1925, Will Bunting is narrating the story to the various people in attendance, and he tells them, doesn't matter how long they were together that night, to lovers an hour can last a century, but even for lovers every hour ends. Back to Abelina and James. James says, Abby, I kept my end of the bargain, now you keep yours. And Abelina says, I can't. With that, James gives her a small knife and he explains, at the dark of the moon, I think it can be anything lethal. I was your godfather, I was your lover, now be my friend. James lies in his bed and says, for the first time in 3 years, I feel like I can sleep. And Abelina grabs a gun and shoots him, killing him, saving James from a lifetime of being a blood-sucking monster. James' book was buried. A year later, Abelina had a new baby girl with her daughter she had with James' book. She named her daughter Felicia. Abelina leaves the cemetery. Will Bunting's still there. He asks Abelina if he can continue to tag along with her, and she replies, just keep up. Back to 1925, Will Bunting, he ends his speech saying, earlier though, one of you asked me why now? Why come here tonight after all these years of lying and finally tell the truth? And I said before that, it's all about time. And I've been around enough death to know when my own time is drawing near, as well as any city doctor at least. So I'm here tonight because I want it to be known by all of you that there are monsters out there, real monsters, that walk the roads and rails of this country. But there are also heroes, men who embody the best we have to offer. Men like my friend, James Book, who was more of a hero than any character I could ever dream up. Because Skinner Sweet didn't win, you understand? James Book never buckled, never gave in. He went to his grave every bit the hero I knew. And if you all need a happy ending, that's the best I can do. Now, I'll be happy to sign books for those who want them. And the people in attendance are crying, moved by this story. And they're asking, wait, what happened to Abelina? And the baby, what about the baby? And Will Bunting says, those are not my stories to tell. Afterwards, you see the people in line are waiting to get an autograph of Will Bunting's on their book. Now, one man in line, he is really scared, and he's bleeding a bit on his arm. He was the one that was sitting beside Skinner Sweet earlier. The man makes his way up to Will Bunting and hands him a note. And the note reads, Dear Scribbler, you are old and I am young for eternity. So I let you live to suffer and die. Why not? What better revenge is there than that? Here is an autograph for you. Skinner Sweet. Outside the bookstore, we see Skinner Sweet has left. Across the street, watching Skinner Sweet, is Abelina and her daughter she had with James' book, Felicia, now older. Felicia asks her mother, is he? And Abelina replies, yes, Felicia. He is the man who destroyed your father. Not today, but soon, soon. Implying that one day, Abelina and Felicia will try and avenge James' book by killing and destroying the vampire Skinner Sweet. And that is how the volume ends. Alright, so that was volume 1, and I thought a very good introductory volume. I like the artwork by Rafael Albuquerque, very horrific, sets a good tone. I was engaged in both stories in the 1800s in the Wild West, and then in the 1920s with Pearl, and seeing some of this era of Hollywood was really fun. Yeah, this is a really solid book. Some criticism I have is there was a lot of characters introduced to us, and I did have a hard time keeping track of everybody. In the end, I was able to do it, but I really had to pay attention. But on the whole, I thought this was a great introductory volume and really set up the world nicely and was really solid. I'm going to give this one an 8.5 out of 10. Thank you all for watching. I will eventually try and cover all these American vampire books because it is a fun, overarching story. But next week, I will be back with something completely different. And I think you are all going to really dig it. It's one of the most action packed horror kind of books of the last several years and just immense fun. So I will see you all then.